I have a question for you. Do video games have to be fun? If you've been around my channel for a bit, then you would know that I've been puzzling over this topic for a while now, because it's something that's on the periphery of this other question that anyone who's older than, 20 has heard many times. Can video games be art? It was more than a decade ago now that the Smithsonian American Art Museum made their exhibit on video games simply titled The Art of Video Games, which I remember sparking some discussion around the topic. Before and after this moment, people would constantly bring up whether or not games, this relatively new medium where you chainsaw dudes in half or do a hoppin' and a skippin' and a jumpin', could be considered art. In current year, I feel we've more than settled that debate. With the likes of Journey, Outer Wilds, Sayonara Wild Hearts, games are visually very artistic, to say nothing of fantastic games writing, or how artistically designed or representative their mechanics are. I think it's safe to say we've concluded that games are art, right? I'm writing it down here. Games are art. If you disagree with this, I encourage you to argue amongst yourselves in the comments, but I don't think this is a hot take, so I'm rolling with it. Here's the thing about art, though. Sometimes it's upsetting. Schindler's List, Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. This piece by Francisco Goya found after his death, which others have named Saturn Devouring His Son. Pink Floyd's The Wall. At the risk of making an insane blanket statement that is in no way accurate, because this is an infamously hard thing to pin down, if art, in its verb form, art is process, not the art object, is principally a form of expression, then what it can express can be as varied in form and emotion as anything else we experience. It could be happy, sure, but also sad, angry, remorseful, existential, or even things outside of emotion, like technical achievement, performance, an invitation to a shared experience, you name it. And if we've already accepted that video games are art, then the next logical step is to say that video games don't have to be entertaining. Now, it's perfectly possible that you still find something entertaining within the game, even if it wasn't the intent, but what I'm talking about here are games whose primary goal isn't entertainment, but to coax some other emotion out of you. Ways that mechanics and the various aspects of game feel interact to evoke a type of experience, which doesn't equate to fun. The natural boredom of walking through Breath of the Wild invites you to contemplate nature and consider the dual realities of everything you've cared about being destroyed by time, but also the land healed, and so did its people. Any horror game's goal is to raise your adrenaline, feel a cathartic shock from what would in reality be a very negative experience. And Papers, Please's stress of paperwork and a choking bureaucracy which breaks people under its weight, from the immigrants and refugees to you and your family. These are all games and genres that I have spoken about in the past, partially because of the emotions they dig out of me. I would like to see more games that move me to tears or force me to reflect on myself like these do, because there is more to any art form than just raw escapism or entertainment. Not that there's anything wrong with that, of course. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start at the beginning, for me at least, where a virtual video game tour and its curator first asked me this question, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Let's talk about the Beginner's Guide. The Beginner's Guide is about Davey Wreden, the original mind and developer behind the Stanley Parable, but the Beginner's Guide is also crucially about another person. Davey narrates the game to you as you walk through disparate levels, each made by this other game designer Davey knew as a younger man by the name of Coda. We walk through these games, which could be more accurately described as prototypes or roughed out ideas on some subject, whether that be prisons, the question, do games need to be playable, and Coda's feelings of inadequacy. Through all of this, Davey is right there with us, narrating the game and its design, and what insights they give us into Coda's psychology. This is a focus throughout the story. By looking into Coda's works, perhaps we can learn something about them and maybe even somehow reach out to them in doing this. Because the unfortunate truth is that Coda was only developing games through a span of 3 years, and has long since stopped. In curating this collection, Davey is hoping to teach us about Coda, and perhaps reach new insights himself on the subject of a long-lost colleague. Spoilers ahead for the story of the Beginner's Guide. Coda goes through a couple of periods where they think about games that can't be completed, a plethora of prison designs, an overall fascination with labyrinths and talking box heads, and Davey is quick to deliver his insights into what things mean, what matters, and what doesn't. For example, Davey will skip you past every labyrinth in the game, and in this level where you're slow to a crawl, Davey allows you to return to normal speed with a button press, if you're so inclined. Eventually, we start seeing Coda's works take a downturn into feelings of burnout, that they'll never escape their prison, or that the creative process isn't as meaningful to them as it used to be, which Davey interprets as Coda being a lonely person who could use some validation from others. Maybe if Coda saw how others loved and appreciated their games for their artistry and insights, like Davey does, Coda would perk up a bit. So, Davey shares Coda's games, and receives loads of interest and passion from others, in hopes this will revitalize the ailing Coda. Soon after this act, Coda releases their final game to Davey specifically, The Tower, before disappearing. The Tower is an intentionally impossible game to play, with an invisible maze that sends you to the start if you touch the walls, a 6-number combination lock that you must brute force to make your way through, and finally, a literal locked door. No tedium, no brute forcing, no key to find. This is simply the end. Or it would be if Davy didn't modify the game to make the maze, the lock, and even this door trivial for you. In those final rooms, Coda reveals that they were deeply injured by Davy's decision to send these games to others, and even modifying them, effectively stealing Coda's works and passing them off as his own, and is still doing with this very game. Davy even admits that if Coda was so injured by this action, then the existence of the Beginner's Guide is an even greater infraction against Coda, but he just had to make this collection to tell Coda that he's learned that what he did was wrong, as if this isn't an escalation of the same sin. By the epilogue of the game, Davy stops his narration, effectively stumbling out of the story after realizing there's something very wrong with him, and the game ends with you rising into the heavens, a callback to a glitch in one of Coda's earliest works, rising above an infinite labyrinth with the stars surrounding you. So the first thing I'd like to spell out for any who might have missed this is that this is fictional. If Coda were a real person who existed, then the Beginner's Guide is Davy Reedon once again stealing Coda's works, this time for money, which would be very illegal. Also, the initial framing only makes sense if you don't know the climax. Coda stopped suddenly making games in 2011? Yeah, Davy, and you know exactly why they did that. It's a work of fiction, framed as if it happened in our reality, but it's a bit illogical in its world building, so I can understand if this didn't work on you. Regardless, this Davy is a character within the world that's built in contrast to Coda, but it also tells us a story about the nature of art and artists that I'd like to talk about. This game has a lot of metaphors and ideas bouncing around in it, including the one about video games, which I've been thinking about for 8+ years. Do games have to be playable? This is an interesting question because the word game quite literally means to play in a lot of the applicable definitions. A game is a structured form of play, an activity that you do to have fun, an amusement or pastime. It really feels like we're hitting a wall of language here, like we've somewhat transcended the use of the word game for some video games, so the wording is confusing as a result. Like, for the filmic medium, the use of movie versus film has a different connotation. One is for entertainment, the other is an artistic pursuit. And while there's absolutely some overlap, when you hear these phrases, it helps clue you in on the experience you're about to walk into. The closest equivalent we have for video games is serious games, but that is both too large, including things like training simulators for pilots or surgeons, and also isn't something that we're actively using in casual conversation, so it doesn't really stand in well for the word film. We're suffering from a lack of language here. Also, though I'm not going to cover it further because I didn't think about it while I was writing the video, this trailer is to the game That Dragon Cancer, and it absolutely fits within the description of both serious games and the topic of this video in general. Play it. It's really good. Well, maybe don't play. You should look up what it's about before you get into it. It might very much hurt you. It did me. Regardless, Coda and Davy argue over whether a game needs to be playable. Davy posits that every game should be, obviously. If you make something, shouldn't you want everyone to experience it? And Coda thinks that just doesn't matter. They even send Davy a huge collection of games to try and prove their point. A collection of 100 empty rooms that you can walk around in. Playable, sure, but they're not communicating anything. I think the word play might not be the best word to describe their contrasting ideas. It's more like, should games be completable? Which is a different topic from the fun one. There are many games out there that emphasize your ability to do every single thing in the game, a smorgasbord of content for you to gobble up like a mechanics buffet. And yet, there is a much smaller contingent of games that chastise you for doing this. By not respecting the game and its world, only seeing it as content to be consumed, you actually damn it. This damage brought about by your disrespect for the game's fiction. And then there's the Beginner's Guide, where there is this extreme complexity and detail hidden behind the relatively simple exterior, or the moments where Coda seeks to slow you down, make you think, and Davy bypasses it for our convenience, bypassing what he thinks is without meaning. The tower simply wouldn't work without Davy's edits to it, because by this point, Coda is aware of who Davy is, so they force him to meddle, to really get to the end and hammer home just what kind of person this is. This moment only makes sense for someone who would do what Davies has done, warp someone's work to their own interpretations over and over, skipping the stuff he thinks doesn't matter, putting extreme emphasis on other portions he finds notable, and even going as far as to change the original work, sometimes mechanically and sometimes textually. The tower is completely unplayable, but because Davy bent it to make it playable, he showed exactly the kind of person he was, to ourselves and to Coda for one last time. Some things aren't meant to be experienced, just thought about. For example, the euthanasia coaster is a roller coaster that causes the rider to die due to the extreme g-forces you are put under in the loops. You just fall asleep and die soon after. A baffling method of capital punishment to be sure, but this was obviously never meant to be constructed or used, just thought about. In a future where death has been eradicated, what would you do with forever? What happens when you do everything? How would you end it? Wouldn't you rather it be fun? The same holds true for some of Coda's ideas. They aren't meant to be played, just created by Coda, an artistic pursuit for them and no one else. The Beginner's Guide is an exploration of a very private individual's work put on display against their wishes for the second time by Davey, revealing in the pursuit of truth that Davey is the villain. It's a story of one artist who is desperate for attention and one who couldn't care less, and what happens when the two clash. There was a video recently released while I was writing this by Jacob Geller called Art for No One that gets into the topic of the Beginner's Guide a bit. Turns out there's a lot of overlap between art for no one and art that isn't fun. You should really watch that video, and also everything Geller's ever made. I know I have. In that video, Jacob Geller says, "The Beginner's Guide is a horror game for people like me." And I couldn't agree more. Earlier I hinted at art's multifaceted definitions. There is art as process, the creation of art, but there's also the finished art object, which we also call art. But these are fundamentally different things for different people. I think the best thing to call Jacob Geller and myself are critics, as much as I dislike being called that, which means I am preoccupied with art objects. As it happens, I know a lot of artists who allow me to analyze and appreciate their works and exercise this muscle often, which I am thankful for. But there's one visual artist that I'm particularly close to which I have a more antagonistic relationship with. They have made work that I have often puzzled over, wondered about its meanings, its use of color, the intent behind the composition or techniques used, and they have never had answers for me, a move that I always found frustrating. And don't worry, unlike Davey, I asked for permission to show this stuff. They are an artist of process who creates for the sake of creation, like Coda. And I have always tried to push meaning onto these works where the artist didn't care to have any, like Davey. In playing through the Beginner's Guide again, I understood what Jacob Geller meant when he called it a horror game for people like us, because there's a chance we get it wrong. The lens through which I view or discuss art, what I share with you people, it could be wrong, or even harm the original work or its creator in my view of it. What happens if I make a mistake? What happens if I make some art worse by telling you about it? Is it wrong to look for meaning where none was intended, warping the original work to my vision, and warping yours in the process? There are no answers to these questions because they are all mistakes, and being human, I'm going to make them, and I'm going to make more of them, but it doesn't make it feel any better. I want to specify again that this is a fictional tale, and Davey is playing a character of himself here. But the story likely exists to help Davey process his feelings after the success of the Stanley Parable, a massive game to this day that likely garnered him tons of praise. For a certain type of person, that could have been a drug, and this game was probably trying to explain that desire, that negative trait of his, to constantly chase that and put a voice to it. Or maybe not. As a Beginner's Guide is a game about someone psychoanalyzing an artist through their art and coming to the wrong conclusions, perhaps I should learn from that and not make the same mistakes. For Davey or my friend. The Beginner's Guide exists not to be a fun experience, but a compelling one. To tell a narrative that the player is moved by, either through that narrative or any of the vignettes of design we see throughout the game. It exists to make the player think, but there is another type of not-so-fun game that exists to cause pain. We all know what I'm talking about with this. The diverse catalog of Soulsborne games from From Software fit the bill, but that's just one genre. GTFO, Darkest Dungeon, Celeste, Project Zomboid. These are all games where the goal of the designer is to make you fail, but not fail in a way where the failing is a joke, like Surgeon Simulator or Cruelty Squad, which is a subject I've covered previously on my Patreon. Failing isn't funny here. It's either a minor bump of the road before you're set back on the path, but more often, it's a painful, agonizing failure. Adversity games often have pretty severe failure states, with high difficulty to push you into those fail states as often as they can muster. Hello, Mr. Strawman here. If these games are just pain simulators, why would anyone play them? Are they just for masochists? Thank you, Strawman. Excellent question. This is a sentiment you've likely heard before about the Get Good gang, and while these games do self-select for the flagellant types, that isn't the full story. For one, each of these games has excellent game feel. Souls games have crunchy attack animations that really communicate the weight of your movements and weapons. Darkest Dungeon's keyframes, the splashes of blood, dynamic poses, and sound effects really communicate the destruction you're dealing and receiving. and GTFO's guns feel massive in the hands of the prisoners, communicating their power well when enemies stagger from the force of your guns and gavels. The moment-to-moment brutality is felt through the game feel, showing that while you are certainly easy to break, so are your enemies. These games feel good to control, and yes, this means if you can push past that initial pain point, you'll probably have fun playing. But fun is more secondary to the overall goal of overcoming adversity, which is why I personally think of these as adversity games. You were facing a mountain of dangers, and if you should fail, you suffer great misfortune as your money, your men, and your time is taken from you. But you dust yourself off, improve your gear, try new strategies, and eventually, you may find the strength to rise to the challenge and win. This moment is the reason why these games exist. Adrenaline rushing, your mind screaming as you're trying to squeeze out the win, and when you pull it off, a rapturous release of pressure, knowing that despite the odds, you did it. You won! That is the secret sauce behind adversity games. Victories can only be so sweet if you had to work hard to taste it. Celeste is one of the few adversity games that makes its metaphors real in this way. Madeline is climbing a literal mountain. Why? To prove that she can. So she climbs, faces setbacks, and learns from those setbacks to be better to those around her, and to be kinder to herself. It is only after fully realizing her potential and making up with her goth self that she is able to make it to the top of the mountain and receive her reward. Not some sword or riches, though those are nice. That's not why we play these games. No, it was for the satisfaction of having done it, for the knowledge that, despite that difficulty, you pulled it off. And I will separate from my get good fellows here to say that any method you find to succeed in these games is valid, because these games are fabulously replayable. You may use the easier methods to play the game your first time, but that doesn't mean you can't come back and give it another go later with some harder strategies. And some people, perhaps due to handicaps or just not being very good at video games in general, would simply never be able to play these games if these easier paths didn't exist, and I don't think we should block anyone from trying to overcome adversity because of personal performance. It's like a ski resort. We got multiple paths for multiple tiers of play. Some people will never pass the easiest course, some people only go for the hardest path possible, and some people will start easy and gain confidence to improve with time. No matter how many times you fail, remember that if it weren't for losing, winning wouldn't mean anything. As I've said earlier, I've been thinking about this video idea for about 8+ years on and off. Do games have to be fun? And my answer should be obvious by now. No, they don't. Instead, they could pursue other methods of creating satisfaction, or eschew fun to try and tell a compelling narrative. But in both of these previous cases, these are games that are still trying to be positively fulfilling in some fashion. The narrative of the beginner's guide brings you enjoyment through experiencing it and thinking about it. Adversity games are brutally hard so that you'll feel immensely satisfied when you achieve victory. Both of these are still positive emotions, just pursued in a different way than raw fun. Let's abandon fun altogether. What I'm going to talk about next is a game about suffering, down to its core. The world is bleak, the mechanics rough, the game difficult to play, and there is no fun to be gained in engaging with it. Through complete misery of both mechanics and narrative, this game wants to show you something about what it means to live through war. Content warning ahead for war talk and various war imagery across film and video games. This War of Mine is a survival game developed by Polish game dev company 11-Bit Studios, though you may also know them from their city sim survival game Frostpunk. Both of these games are critical darlings, but whereas we can kind of enjoy Frostpunk at a remove from its politics, there is no sparing that for this game. This War of Mine differentiates itself from almost all other war games coming out in its time for choosing who it wants to depict. Most war games, even today, choose to represent war as a fun time rather than as the serious undertaking it is. Call of Duty and Battlefield are standout examples, but even games that are anti-war, like Spec Ops The Line, rest in peace, or the Metal Gear series, still show their politics through the eyes of a soldier, a capable and strong figure within the setting, at least in comparison to the common folk. This is what makes this War of Mine different. You are the common folk, civilians caught in what remains of a city ruined by civil war. You play as anywhere from 1 to 4 people in a blown-out building, trying to survive and scrounge for supplies in any way they can. During the day, you manage your house, using crafting stations to build new items or produce materials needed to live, like food, medicine, perhaps bandages, comforts like moonshine and cigarettes, and tools for finding more items like lockpicks, crowbars, or knives. At night, a single person ventures into the city to scavenge for more supplies, whether they be building materials, food or water, or weapons. This War of Mine is a pretty sparse survival game in terms of its systems. It's really just an inventory manager and timers, with a stealth combat system which you really don't want to interact with more than you need to. It's very mechanics light, but it makes up for that with the sheer personality its characters display. Each character has a pertinent skill that defines their role in your survival plan, giving you a mechanical reason to identify with them. As an example, Bruno here is a good cook, meaning he makes any edible consumables with less resources. Marco has greater inventory capacity than anyone else, and Pavle is fast. Marco becomes my central scavenger due to his inventory capacity, and Bruno is a godsend, allowing me to stretch all of my resources further by being more efficient with their use. And Pavle, well, he's here when I need him. These two are central to my survival strategy, which means if anything happens to them, I am severely screwed. These are the mechanical pressures that get you to care about these characters, which the game leans into hard. There's a bio attached to the characters that tells you their life story up until this point, right beside their face. And because we humans are wired to identify faces out of anything, you cannot help but connect with this person. The game is begging you to identify with them and see their humanity, which makes the nighttime decisions only harder. Every time you go out to scavenge in the night, you are presented with moral choices, over fighting your fellows to survive or sifting through the rubble to find what you need to eke out one more day. I spent many days fighting off sickness from Pavle, pushing characters to the brink of exhaustion in an effort to gain any sort of stability, only for them to crack from a lack of sleep. I would be raided by other survivors, taking our stuff and injuring Bruno in the process, something that would happen multiple times. As Bruno's wounds worsened, I would ask him to make food for everyone else as his character cried out about his blood loss, Marco constantly searching for bandages and medicine until he couldn't stay up any longer, and I was forced to send Pavle out, with no one awake back home, increasing the chances of a raid even further. While this War of Mine may be very sparse mechanically, it excels at producing stories, because you can't help but see the people you're playing as people. As my situation grew worse and worse, I often took note of that far-off home where an elderly couple lived. It would be so easy to steal from them, but I didn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't hurt someone else for my own gain. Until that day came. Everyone was tired or wounded. I had no way to defend myself. I couldn't just go out and pick a fight with anyone, so I did it. I stole from that elderly couple. I left a lot behind, and I left the bandages for his wife in case they were needed, but it felt awful. I felt awful. And Bruno did right along with me. This War of Mine drenches all of its decisions in this type of context. If we were playing this game like a RimWorld, then sure, we could ruthlessly set about our survival as efficiently as possible. Many colony simulators push you to deny the humanity of your subjects in this effort of producing the most efficient base, but this War of Mine does not let you make that decision. Each person you face can be either a fellow survivor or a soldier, and the soldiers have so much firepower that facing them takes exceptional amounts of preparation, and even that prep work comes with moral decisions. Do you steal from the defenseless? Do you kill a fellow survivor for their weapon? Or do you maintain your morals? Because if you do that, you will quickly run out of those moral options before you find yourself at the business end of multiple soldiers and their guns. Morality is a pretty big part of this game's decision-making. Survival is a lot easier if you hurt others, but why would you do that? Your characters are fully human, they have a face, a name, and a bio telling you all about them. Would you not extend that same courtesy to others? Or do you even have a choice, given that you're injured and your two partners are sick and hungry themselves, so if you don't find them some food and medicine, they will die, so now there's no other option. It's do or die, now. Maybe it's more accurate to say that this War of Mine doesn't represent morality, but morality versus reality in wartime. It presents you with a moral choice, but with a razor-thin margin, too little time, and too many avenues to explore when it comes to survival, you will soon find those avenues drying up, and you must choose between your life or someone else's. All of this is meant to communicate what I hope is obvious. War is a nightmare, and there is a lot more to it than just soldiers and their toys. This War of Mine was primarily inspired by the Siege of Sarajevo, a 4-year siege of the city of the same name, the longest siege of a capital city in modern history, but that isn't its only inspiration. The team had spent months poring over civilian accounts of war going back hundreds of years. The game stands as a crystallized chunk of what it means to live through war. It is about understanding and sympathizing with the damage that's been done. The damage that's being done. Look, let me come out and say, I've rewritten this portion of the video many times now in an attempt to not sound preachy, but it's hard for me to not sound preachy as an American because I have never experienced any of the sacrifices of war, only its fruits. We know for a fact that our American government has stopped opposing governments from rising in the South Americas multiple times, and all of our greatest enemies lie across the Pacific and Atlantic, where any attack involving bodies would take hours to get here and be seen for miles. This is why missiles, nukes, and mutually assured destruction are about the only thing we culturally fear as Americans, but again, that's not war, that's global annihilation. The knowledge of war's consequences for the American citizen is so foreign to us that we've made media fantasizing about it. Like the British Empire before us with War of the Worlds, we've made disaster and action movies wondering about the destruction of the American way of life from Independence Day to 2012, watching what is essentially a horror movie for governments. And games have done so as well. The original version of Modern Warfare 2 illustrates this beautifully. No Russian happens. An American is ousted as the perpetuator of that terrorist attack, and Russia retaliates by disabling American satellites and coordinating a massive attack on the eastern seaboard. You drive into a suburb on tanks, people screaming for support over your radio, parachutes of supplies and soldiers falling out of the skies. The level ends with you defending a VIP at Burger Town. And while this is only really here so that you can go through a wave fight, it's serving an important narrative function. This was a place where people ate greasy fast food burgers while they were at the mall, but now, it's just a good defensive bunker. Its freezer conveniently bulletproof. The next couple of missions involving the Americans takes you to DC, where you fight through the Washington Monument, the World War II Memorial, all the way to the White House to stop the Russian assault and save the city in the process, your final goal being to avert an attack by your own jets to destroy the White House and surrounding city. If we can't have it, no one can. I say all this to illustrate how far Infinity Ward went just to make us feel something about the destruction caused to our home, how desensitized we are to it. I can tell you firsthand that when I was a child playing this, none of it hit me like it is right now. Contrast that to this moment where my spotter and I were taking cover in this barn house as we were sniping at enemy Germans. This was someone's barn house. This was a field for growing wheat. Where is that farmer now? Are they also fighting the Germans? Have they abandoned their home and work in search of safety? Or are they gone, a casualty of war? These are not questions Hell Let Loose encourages you to think about. Wars have a cost to its land and its people, sometimes taking their lives, but sometimes leaving them alive and taking something else instead. Rarely do we reconcile with this in our lives as Americans, and that's no less true in our fiction. There's a famous saying in film that comes from the French filmmaker and actor François Truffaut, who goes, "There's no such thing as an anti-war film." And I think you can by and large say the same thing about video games. The filmic medium has a hard time showing war as a completely negative thing because of the bombast of film. Even if wars are bad, they can be portrayed as necessary to defeat a greater evil. And if you're trying to show the destruction and chaos of war as a great evil, some people will walk away instead thinking that chaos was badass. As much as I understand the horror now, as a child I thought walking through the suburbs of Middle America was neat. And it is neat, isn't it? It shakes up the usual level geometry. It's certainly a new setting. For as awful as this is in context, it is fun to play multiplayer matches in Terminal. Despite what they represent and the story Kojima and his team are trying to tell through the Metal Gear, you cannot deny that they're cool as fuck. They roar like a T-Rex. Isn't that neat? Games that pursue the same visual spectacle of film are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Some people will see the horror, and some people will see the fireworks. Hell, in terms of business, you're selling to two demographics at once. That's good money. But this war of mine is different. This war of mine takes the position that no matter which side of the war you're sitting on, from the perspective of those caught in the middle, it makes no difference. It is a living hell, and one where despite the ideologies of either side, who is right and wrong, to the civilians it's just hunger, suffering, and death. There is no joy to be found here, not for the civilians, and not in the mechanics, and not for you playing it. If there was ever such a thing as an anti-war video game, let alone anti-war anything, it is this War of Mine, through and through. A grueling, upsetting, tense, and honestly, sometimes boring game to play. And that's about how war deserves to be represented. No matter how you slice it, this War of Mine is an upsetting game, mechanically and narratively, producing an experience that is just meant to agonize you, in the hopes of making you see what the true cost of war is. Not the fiscal cost, not the cost of each bomb dropped or bullet fired, but the human one. The innocent lives endangered by conflict, and how human they all are, just like you or me. In this case, it's not that video games don't have to be fun, but perhaps they shouldn't be fun. The impact of their stories are stronger for the suffering you felt experiencing them. If games are art, then sometimes they exist to communicate other things than just raw fun. Either gaining fun through adversity, or prioritizing a different emotion, or even just trying to be painful to prove a point. I hope this video has proven useful in broadening horizons if this wasn't something you believed already. Sometimes a game isn't fun, and that actually makes it better. When playing a game, especially an indie project or something more artful, try to keep that in mind if you're not having a traditionally good time. Maybe that's exactly the point. I am Super Dude. Thank you for watching.